The upscale lobby of the Chateau Laurier fell completely silent when a hotel security guard planted his hand flat against the chest of a woman who had just stepped out of a taxi in the Ottawa rain. She was wearing a dark wool blazer, carrying a leather overnight bag, and had done absolutely nothing wrong. The guard's voice cut through the elegant hum of the lobby like a fire alarm in a cathedral. "Ma'am, this entrance is for registered guests and members only. I'm going to have to ask you to use the side door and speak with the front desk," he said it loudly. Loudly enough that the couple checking in 20 feet away turned to look. Loudly enough that the concierge behind the marble counter visibly winced. Security guard Dennis Pratt had worked the Chateau Laurier for 9 years. He was a man who had confused familiarity with authority for so long that he could no longer tell the difference between the two. He had a particular talent for deciding, the moment someone stepped through those brass-handled doors, exactly whether they belonged. He thought he was reading people. He was reading something else entirely, and on this particular Thursday evening in November, with sleet tapping against the tall arched windows and the smell of wood smoke drifting from the lobby fireplace, he had just made the single most consequential mistake of his career. The woman he had stopped was Lieutenant Colonel Adaeze Okafor-Nnaji of the Canadian Armed Forces, attached to the Joint Operations Command, recipient of the Meritorious Service Medal, and scheduled to deliver the opening address at a National Veterans Symposium that the hotel was hosting in its main ballroom the following morning. She had a room booked under the Department of National Defense account. She had a printed itinerary in the outer pocket of her bag, and she had been walking through the front doors of hotels like this one since before Dennis Pratt had his first security job. She did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She simply stopped walking, set her bag down on the polished floor with quiet deliberateness, and looked at the guard with the kind of patience that only comes from years of operating in environments where losing your composure gets people killed. "I am a registered guest," she said. Her voice was steady and clear. "My name is Adaeze Okafor-Nnaji. I have a reservation confirmed this morning." "I'm sure you do," Pratt said, not backing down an inch, his posture communicating everything his words were avoiding. "I'll just need you to go to the desk and verify that before you come any further into the lobby." She looked at him, not with anger, not yet, with something closer to recognition, the particular recognition of a woman who had worn a uniform for 22 years, and still, in civilian clothes, in November rain, in one of the most prestigious hotels in the national capital, found herself exactly here, 3 blocks away, in the hotel's side parking structure. Brigadier-General Audrey Solange Beaumont was helping her aide carry a box of symposium materials from the trunk of a government vehicle. She had arrived early, as she always did. In 40 years of service, she had never once been the last person in the room. She had given the opening remarks at this symposium 3 years running, and she had personally invited Lieutenant Colonel Okafor-Nnaji to lead this year's session. A decision that had taken 6 months of scheduling, 2 departmental approvals, and 1 direct call to the Deputy Minister of National Defense. She was not a woman who tolerated waste. She was very much not a woman who tolerated the wasting of other people's dignity. Her aide, a young corporal named Felix Ouellet, handed her the box and then checked his phone. His expression shifted. He looked up carefully. "Ma'am, I just received a message from the hotel coordinator. There's an issue at the front entrance involving Lieutenant Colonel Okafor-Nnaji." Solange Beaumont set the box back in the trunk. "What kind of issue?" Ouellet's jaw tightened. "Security is blocking her entry, ma'am." The Brigadier-General closed the trunk with a measured click. She straightened the lapel of her civilian blazer. She had come directly from a working dinner at the department and had not yet changed, and looked at the corporal with the flat, unhurried expression of someone who had assessed actual crises on 2 continents and was deeply unimpressed with this one. "Lead the way, Corporal." Back in the lobby, the situation had not improved. Dennis Pratt had called over his supervisor, a man named Gary Tremaine, who had the misfortune of possessing even less situational awareness than his subordinate. Tremaine positioned himself beside Pratt with his arms crossed, adding institutional weight to what was quickly becoming institutional embarrassment. "Look," Tremaine said, his tone sliding into the particular register of a man who believes de-escalation means talking slower. "We have a big event this weekend. Lots of people trying to walk in who don't have bookings. We're just following protocol." "I have a booking," Adaeze said. She reached into the side pocket of her bag, withdrew a printed confirmation, and held it out. Tremaine glanced at it, briefly, the way you glance at something when you've already decided what your answer is going to be. That could be anything printed off the internet, he said. We'd need to verify it at the front desk. Then, let me walk to the front desk, she said. Once we've confirmed you have a reason to be here, Pratt said. Absolutely. The confirmation she was holding had the Department of National Defense letterhead on it. It listed her full name, her rank, her room number, and her scheduled speaking engagement. It was about as official a document as a piece of paper could be without a wax seal and a coat of arms. Neither man appeared to find this relevant. The lobby had grown quiet, in the specific way that lobbies grow quiet, when something is happening that everyone can see and no one wants to be the first to acknowledge. A family near the elevator, a businessman with his rolling luggage, paused halfway across the marble floor. The concierge, a woman named Isabelle Pepin-Lefebvre, who had worked the front desk for 11 years and had already recognized Adaeze from last year's symposium program, was reaching slowly for the phone behind the counter. Adaeze took a breath. She had fought this particular battle in one form or another since she was a second lieutenant. She had fought it in dress uniform and in civilian clothes, at roadblocks in Mali and at cocktail parties in Halifax. She knew exactly where it led if you stayed calm and exactly where it led if you didn't. She chose calm. She was very, very good at choosing calm. I will not be using the side entrance, she said, her voice dropping to the register that her officers described, among themselves, as the one you do not argue with. I am a registered guest of this hotel. I am an officer of the Canadian Armed Forces, and I have a confirmed speaking engagement at the event your hotel is hosting tomorrow morning. If you are detaining me, tell me on what grounds. If you are not detaining me, I am going to the front desk. She picked up her bag, and that was the moment the lobby doors opened behind the two security guards and admitted Brigadier-General Audrey Solange Beaumont. She was not a tall woman. She was in her early 60s, with close-cropped silver hair and the posture of someone who had long since stopped needing height to command a room. She carried nothing. She required nothing. She walked in the way that people walk when every room they've entered for the past 4 decades has arranged itself around them. She took one look at the scene, Adaeze standing with her bag at her feet, confirmation in hand, 2 security guards blocking her path, and her expression did not change. If anything, it became more still. Gentlemen, she said. Both men turned. Neither one immediately understood what they were looking at, because she was not in uniform. But something in the absolute zero of her tone triggered an instinct that bypassed conscious reasoning. My name is Audrey Solange Beaumont. I am a Brigadier-General in the Canadian Armed Forces and the senior organizer of the symposium your hotel is hosting this weekend. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The lobby acoustics did the work. The woman you are currently blocking from entering is my keynote speaker, Lieutenant Colonel Adaeze Okafor-Nnaji, who has a confirmed reservation under a federal government account and who is expected at a program briefing in 22 minutes. I would like to know, clearly and specifically, what is happening here. Pratt's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Tremaine made a sound that was not quite a word. I see, said Solange Beaumont, interpreting the silence with the accuracy of someone who had been reading situations for 4 decades. She reached into her blazer pocket and produced a phone. She did not scroll through it dramatically. She did not make a show of finding the number. She simply pressed it and raised it to her ear. Henri, she said when the call connected, using the first name of the hotel's general manager, a man named Henri Delacroix-Menard, whom she had spoken to personally when finalizing the symposium arrangements 8 weeks prior. This is Audrey Solange Beaumont. I'm standing in your front lobby. I need you down here in the next 2 minutes. Your security staff has detained my keynote speaker at the front entrance. A pause. No, I'm not sending an email. 2 minutes, Henri. She lowered the throat. Ma'am, we were simply following standard verification procedures. Do not speak to me about procedures, Solange, Bar said, and there was no heat in it. Just the flat, terminal finality of a woman who had written procedures, reviewed procedures, and implemented procedures at a level that Gary Tremaine's career would never approach. You looked at a woman walking into a hotel with a printed reservation from the Department of National Defense, and you decided she needed to prove she had a right to be here. I have been doing this work for a long time. I know exactly what that decision was based on, and it was not procedure." Adaeze had not moved. She was watching all of this with the same composed attention she brought to everything. There was something in her posture that was not quite satisfaction. She was not a woman who enjoyed scenes, but something quieter. A recognition that the thing she had been holding alone for the past 4 minutes was no longer hers to hold alone. Henri Delacroix-Menard arrived in 3 minutes, not 2, because the elevator was slow and he had come directly from the administrative floor. He was a slim man in a dark suit who, upon taking in the geography of the situation, turned the specific shade of pale that very competent people turn when they understand immediately and completely how badly something has gone wrong on their watch. "Brigadier-General," he said, moving past his security staff without acknowledging them. "Lieutenant Colonel, I am deeply, deeply sorry." "The apology is appreciated, Henri," Solange Beaumont said. "But I think we need to talk about what just happened and what your hotel intends to do about it." "Not tonight. Tomorrow morning, before the session begins." Delacroix-Menard nodded rapidly. Then he turned to his security staff with an expression that communicated, with great efficiency, that the next conversation they had with him would be significantly less comfortable than this one. He personally walked Lieutenant Colonel Okafor-Nnaji to the front desk. He personally ensured her check-in was handled with the kind of care that 4-star hotels exist to provide. He personally apologized twice more, once at the desk and once at the elevator. Adaeze thanked him once, briefly, and then she was done with it, or appeared to be, because she had a program briefing in 18 minutes and a keynote address to finish preparing. What she didn't know yet, what nobody in the lobby knew, was that Isabelle Pépin-Lefebvre, the concierge who had been reaching for the phone when all of this began, had indeed made a call. Not to the general manager, not to the security office. She had called the hotel's duty manager to report that a guest had been stopped at the front entrance in a manner she considered discriminatory. And she had done so because she had worked in hospitality for 11 years, and she knew the difference between security and something else. The duty manager had forwarded the report to HR before the elevator Adaeze rode up in had reached the 6th floor. Dennis Pratt and Gary Tremaine did not go back to their regular rotation that evening. They were pulled from the floor within the hour by the hotel's human resources director, a woman named Carol Ann Boudreau-Fitch, who had received the duty manager's report and cross-referenced it with the hotel's check-in records and confirmed reservation logs in the time it took them to walk back to the security office. The documentation was unambiguous. Lieutenant Colonel Okafor-Nnaji had a confirmed reservation. She had arrived at the correct entrance at the correct time with correct identification. There was no procedural basis for what had occurred. Boudreau-Fitch had been in HR for 17 years. She had a zero-tolerance clause in the hotel's conduct policy that she had personally revised 2 years prior specifically to address guest-facing discriminatory behavior. She did not use the word allegedly. She did not use the phrase lapse in judgment. She opened the meeting with both men by placing a printed copy of that policy on the table and asking them to point to the section that authorized what they had done. Neither man could. The investigation that followed was not lengthy, because investigations are not lengthy when the evidence is a lobby full of witnesses, a security camera system, and a printed reservation with a Department of National Defense letterhead that one of the involved parties described as something printed off the internet. Pratt and Tremaine were suspended without pay within 48 hours. Formal termination proceedings were initiated at the end of the week. The symposium opened on Friday morning to a full ballroom. 240 veterans, serving members, family representatives, and senior officials from DND and Veterans Affairs filled the chairs. The Chateau Laurier's main ballroom was all gilded ceilings and tall windows looking out over the Rideau Canal, and the morning light came in at an angle that turned everything copper and gold. Brigadier-General Audrey Solange Beaumont gave the welcome address. She did not mention the previous evening. She spoke about the purpose of the symposium, about the men and women whose service the weekend was designed to honor, and about the specific and ongoing work of building institutions that reflect the values those men and women had served to protect. She was precise, and she was brief, and the room listened, the way rooms listen when the person speaking has earned the right to silence. Then Lieutenant Colonel Adaeze Okafor-Nnaji walked to the front of the room. She was in uniform, The dark green of the Canadian Forces service dress, the meritorious service medal on her chest, the gold oak leaves of her rank on her shoulders. She stood at the lectern for a moment, without speaking, looking out at the room, and the room looked back at her. She spoke for 40 minutes. She spoke about what it means to serve in an institution that does not always see you clearly. She spoke about the gap between what Canada asks of its soldiers and what it offers them in return. And she spoke about it without anger and without apology. The way you speak about things that are true and that you have lived. She talked about her own path, the early postings, the deployments, the years spent being the only person in a room who looked like her, and the different, harder years spent deciding what to do with that. She talked about the obligation of those who do reach senior rank to reach back, not because it resolves anything, but because leaving people to fight those battles alone is its own kind of dereliction. The room was completely still. When she finished, there were a few seconds of silence before the applause started, and those seconds said more than the applause did. Adaeze stepped back from the lectern and returned to her seat, and her expression as she sat down was the same composed, privately focused expression it had been the night before in the lobby, the expression of a woman who had said what needed to be said and was already thinking about what came next. What came next, in the days following the symposium, was a formal complaint filed by Brigadier-General Solange Beaumont with the hotel's parent company, a letter sent to the hotel's general manager from DND's Legal Services Directorate, and a meeting between the hotel's ownership group and its HR leadership that resulted in a mandatory review of guest-facing conduct training across all 4 of the company's Canadian properties. The termination of Dennis Praut and Gary Tremaine was confirmed 2 weeks after the symposium. Praut applied for 3 security positions in the following month. In each case, a reference check was conducted. In each case, the inquiry came back to Chateau Laurier HR. In each case, the outcome was the same. Gary Tremaine filed a grievance with the Provincial Labour Board, arguing wrongful dismissal. The board reviewed the documentation, the witness statements, the security footage, and the hotel's conduct policy. The policy he had been provided, acknowledged in writing, and then violated in a lobby full of people, and dismissed his grievance in its entirety. Neither man was given a second chance by the institution they had embarrassed. The institution had its own reputation to protect, and more importantly, its own reckoning to complete. In the weeks after the event, Isabelle Papin-Lefebvre, the concierge who had made the call, was commended by hotel management for following the correct reporting procedure. She accepted the commendation with characteristic composure and went back to her desk. In the months after the event, the National Veterans Symposium received its highest attendance registration in 8 years, with a waiting list for the following year's session that began forming before the official announcement date. The keynote speaker from the November session was asked to return. She accepted. Lieutenant Colonel Adaeze Okafor-Nnaji continued her work with the Joint Operation Command. She continued writing policy. She continued mentoring junior officers. She continued, when asked, giving talks about what it looks like to serve in an institution that is still catching up to the people inside it. She did not define herself by what had happened in that lobby. She had too much other work to do. But she didn't forget it either. She knew better than to forget it. Forgetting was a luxury she had learned, early, not to budget for. The lesson that Dennis Praut and Gary Tremaine were supposed to have learned, long before they ever reached. That lobby is the same one that people in positions of petty authority keep refusing to learn until it costs them everything. A uniform is not the only thing that earns respect, and a badge is not the only thing that commands a room. Sometimes the most powerful person walking through your door is the one you've already decided doesn't belong there. Praut stopped her at the entrance because he thought he was reading the room. He wasn't. He was revealing himself, and the room, every witness, every camera, every official document, every report that went up the chain in the hours that followed, was reading him right back. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone you know, or something you've seen, or a moment you've never been able to explain to someone who wasn't there, hit the like button and share it. This channel exists for stories like this one. Subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and stay with us. Justice doesn't always arrive loudly, but it does always arrive.